Good morning. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our weekly e-learning session. My name is Dwayne Henderson, a member of Cree Lighting's training and education team and host of our e-learning series. For those watching live, happy Friday. Quickly about the session, once we begin, we'll have roughly 15 minutes of content. Our presenter will be available for Q&A at the end of the session. And although the participants are muted, we do encourage you all to use the chat or Q&A box to ask questions. Please feel free to type those in during the presentation. And again, we'll circle back and answer those at the end. And today's presentation looks forward a bit and discuss the IES's efforts regarding lighting for outdoor pedestrian spaces. And to walk us through this, I'd like to welcome Shirley Coyle. Good morning, Shirley.
Good morning, Dwayne. Happy to be here.
Great, great. Good to have you again. Hey, before we get started, can you remind the audience of your role in the business?
Sure. A couple of roles in the business. I'm fortunate to get to lead a team of specification sales managers who are in the U.S. market. So we're here to support the lighting design community as well as our lighting agents in anything that in terms of lighting specification. And in the Canadian business, I'm the business unit leader there. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you as a IES committee member. I'm part of the IES committee that has developed, is working on a couple of new documents, and I want to give you a sneak peek on these two documents that are headed your way. We have a great team on this, of volunteers on this committee, including lighting practitioners, researchers, and equipment manufacturers, like myself, a good balance of people who have been able to share best practices and what the technology can do.
Perfect.
So, sorry, Dwayne, did you want to say something else?
No, I said perfect. Well, let's get started.
Okay. So the two documents that I'm going to introduce you to today, the first is a new type of document called an LP, a lighting practice document, that you'll see more of these in different areas. That will be the first document out, and it should be launched as part of the IES online library coming up in the next few weeks here. And so this is the lighting practice -2 for outdoor pedestrian spaces. More of a guideline document about the design considerations and design process. And then RP43 is a new recommended practice that will be lighting for exterior spaces. That's still in the balloting stages. The recommended practices are always the home of the charts and tables that have luminance or illuminance values and other metrics. So lighting calculations or lighting designs. This would be where you'd find that information. That'll be coming a little bit later, but I'll give you a sneak peek at least on what the tables are going to look like. So behind the efforts here is the fact that most of our population is now living in urban settings where outdoor space is extremely valuable, especially now as we live through a pandemic. And livable towns and cities attract people to walk and bike and stay connected while using public spaces. Lighting in these spaces needs to consider the pedestrian needs and pedestrian-based tasks. Until now, much of the lighting for outdoor spaces has really been governed by vehicular roadway standards like RP8, where the pedestrian is only considered as a potential conflict. So this committee and these documents put the pedestrian at the center of the design process. So here's our agenda. We're going to look at, talk through the design considerations, the design process, the processes that are laid out in the documents, and then we'll have a quick look at the numbers as they stand right now in a draft version. So the new document looks first at the needs of the pedestrian. What's the purpose of pedestrian lighting? Why do they need it? The very first in the hierarchy of needs for the pedestrian is orientation and wayfinding. So how a pedestrian navigates through a space. Orientation is the ability to comprehend your surroundings and other pedestrians. And then wayfinding is the ability to make a movement decision and choose a path or navigate a path. The second need for pedestrian lighting comes to us as reassurance. And this is the term that indicates your level of comfort in the space. This is line of sight detection of any possible threats, including from other pedestrians, or and being able to detect boundaries and egress points so you know you have a place to exit. And good lighting can reduce can reduce the degree that your reassurance drops after dark. So by having good lighting, we can keep people engaged and using spaces that we want to have active after dark. The next area of pedestrian need is safety concerns, and this involves the physical safety of the pedestrian against hazards that can be caused by terrain changes like stairs, what you see on the left, but they also need to be able to identify unexpected obstacles such as changes in pavement grade or curbs or wheel stops, maybe slippery conditions or other moving pedestrians, whether it's a cyclist or a skateboarder. And if you think about lighting stairs, if we get it too uniform, then the stairs kind of disappear. So it's important to have some contrast in these when you're coming up against obstacles. And finally, after those other concerns are taken care of, then we can get to the interesting stuff, the atmosphere and enjoyment portion. And so this is supplemental lighting. Depending on the space, there's often furniture included that's designed for activities like socializing or resting and checking your phone. And we want visual enjoyment. So depending on the activities, they may require application-specific lighting to reveal them. Other considerations in terms of the lighting for the space include minimizing the impact of lighting on humans and on the environment. So we're now all very aware of the impact of light on human health. So there's a lot of information in the standard 2 about how to take a thoughtful approach to the design and only use light where it is needed and when it is needed so that we can limit the negative impacts on human health and help maintain the light-dark cycle especially. And finally, minimizing environmental impacts. Light pollution is a broad term that encompasses stray light, sky glow, and light trespass. So there's a lot in these documents in terms of concern of addressing overlighting. So sky glow can be reduced. You see sky glow in LA on the left-hand side. It can be reduced by careful selection of the luminaires, designing a lighting system that puts light only where it's needed, and uses controls to limit it, to reduce it at later times of day when there's less activity, and then turn the lights off if it's not needed. For light trespass that we see on the right-hand image here, this is unwanted stray light that comes onto surrounding properties. So light trespass can be reduced by careful selection again of the luminaires and shielding and making sure the distribution works and using controls. And then also considering carefully the mounting locations and the height of the luminaire in the context of the surrounding area. And finally, spectrum. We recognize that as an environmental concern, especially in certain areas like a turtle nesting area. So in these areas, you want to limit any unwanted light and also limit the spectral content of the light. Zones have been well established as a practice in community planning with the idea that zones allow a community to determine and regulate appropriate use of different areas. And lighting zones were originally implemented in the late 90s to help reduce light pollution. And now they've become a useful tool to design environmentally responsible solutions. So there are 5 lighting zones, LZ0 that you see here in this image, and then LZ1 through 4, which is typically where we would be working with outdoor lighting. LZ0 that you see here is really an area where there's an expectation of no electric light, no ambient light. You would need it in certain points, but it would be extremely limited and highly controlled. So these are areas like national parks or wilderness preserves. LZ1 through LZ4, you see here LZ1 up in an example up in the upper left. This would be cover most residential areas where you want to keep the light levels as low as possible, no expectation of continuous lighting. LZ2 would be residential and dense residential and commercial. And then 3 would cover most everything else, which would be high commercial activity, downtown areas. LZ4 in the bottom right is really reserved for very rare occasions. An example would be Times Square in New York City. So now we move to the design process. And although this is a creative process, we do want to provide a framework for people, especially coming into this without having done a lot of it. So the practitioners agreed that orientation and wayfinding are the basis of the pyramid that you build on. Then we add lighting for reassurance, then consider hazard safety, and finally look at atmosphere and enjoyment. And then the other starting point is to make sure you ask key questions before you start going into design. Excuse me. So it's important to establish these things at the start, and there's a lot of detail in the document. So with a decision maker, whether it's a developer, the community itself, or other design professionals. Hierarchy and context will be the first area in the design process. So you want to manipulate the different areas. Some you will light more to bring them out, and others you will light less to diminish them. But you have to remember you're in a context, not just the site you're designing, but what's the view, what are the impacts of the surrounding areas. And then we look at transitions and zones. And so this is think about moving from one area to another within the space outdoors. Should it be subtle or abrupt to create some drama? And are there unique needs on your site? So are there users, if it's a seniors facility, may want to have more light? And is the terrain gentle, or do we need more light because it's a more difficult terrain? Orientation and wayfinding. So with this, you want to subtly direct the user in the space. And we want this to be intuitive. You use lighting that allows them to see where they are, how they will navigate, be able to see egress points. So you want to light both the vertical and the horizontal surfaces, give visual cues, but keep it intuitive. And then reassurance is really important to make the spaces be active and effective at night. And it's not just about adding more light. You definitely want to create a sense of comfort. You want to reveal the space for people. So if you look at the soft perimeter brightness on the application on the left here, by giving that soft lighting to that wall continuously, it gives vertical light and allows for facial recognition, or at least to be able to make an assessment of the people that are there. And it makes people comfortable enough while still enjoying the space without glare. And for terrain and object safety, this is looking at two different aspects. The terrain would be the actual natural changes that the landscape, whether it's a built landscape or a natural landscape, as you approach them, you want to reveal them in time, that the person walking through the area or navigating the area is not suddenly upon a change. And then an object would be something that's not expected. It isn't designed into the space. It might be someone dropping their taco or dropping an ice cream cone. And you, again, want to have a sufficient light that someone can recognize a hazard and step around it. And then finally, for most designers, this is the part that really is the most exciting and satisfying part of the design, creating a space that will invoke some kind of emotional response and allow the people to have a really great perception of the space. So here the designer is going to leverage the architecture that's involved, the materials, the textures, and use reflectances and to really achieve the functionality they're looking for. So that takes us through the design processes and gives you an idea of what will be in the documents that way. Now we'll take a look at the tables that will be, or the table that will be in RP43 when it comes out. And this gives you the numbers. If you're doing lighting design and you need to do calculations, this would be where you look. A reminder again, this is draft. I've tried to highlight that on these last few slides. So what are you going to see in this table? typical is if you've used other IES tables, you'll see the left hand gives you the types of application. It'll run through the most common applications in outdoor spaces, and we'll cover that for each lighting zone. So once you've determined what lighting zone with your client or your community, what it's going to be, then you can select. And then on the next section will show you what you're typically used to seeing, which would be horizontal and vertical illuminance if it's appropriate for the area, and then giving you the amounts, the target levels in lux and foot candles, as well as some uniformity information on a ratio of average to minimum. But you will see in this area, it's not just a single value. There's a min value and a max value. So how do you know which to use once you've selected your, well, what you will do is look at another chart, which is a weighting factor, and you'll probably do this once or twice, and then you'll incorporate it and know how to use this yourself. It will become internalized. But it includes things like adjacencies. So if you're designing a public space that is surrounded by a lot of retail shops and there's already a lot of ambient light falling on the area you're designing, then you can probably you can use that. It reduces the need of light, and that's a -1. But then you look at mixed travel types, and maybe there are also cyclists and skateboarders coming through the area. So that counts as a +1. If you're sharing the space with multiple faster moving pedestrians, then you need to allow a little more light. And then maybe if you're designing a space that at the bottom there has age of users, you think about the seniors facility I mentioned, where you want more light. So you're going to tally up those once you've gone through the weighting factors, -1s, +1s. There might be 0, no effect, and then you'll decide, should I be on the high end of the range or the low end of the range? So that's the target values. On the far right, we've divided the target values that we just went through are the lighting for human vision and visibility and research. These other 3 columns on the far right are lighting for responsible design. That's how we've called them. You're well aware, I'm sure, of the first couple of columns, which would be optical control. And for those, we're using the TM15, ISTM15 bug. Pick that up from the manufacturer's spec sheet. So we've got maximum glare ratings depending on the zone, and then that's for optical control, as well as uplight, an uplight rating. And then in the middle of that section, there's controls, and we're not being prescriptive about what type of control to do, but just that you do need to use control. And if you're going to dim, make sure it's at least 50% to be effective. And then the final right-hand column, which is titled Spectrum under this lighting for responsible design, is really the most unusual part. And my last slide on that is, for now, it's going to be characterized by a CCT, which unfortunately is not a great metric. We've talked about this before, that it's a pretty lousy metric for actually telling you what the spectral content is of a source. You can have the same CCT and have very different spectral content. It really is just about the appearance, unfortunately. But it's what we have right now. It's what people are familiar with using. We're duking it out. The people who really know this stuff within the IES, the CIE, and other groups are currently arm wrestling over what we can do for an M/P ratio. There are 4 different ways to calculate that. So there's a lot of debate still going on. So for now, unfortunately, our placeholder is CCT. So in that column, you'll be given, depending on your type of application and your lighting zone, one of these 4 categories: very high, high, medium, or low. Very high, it doesn't mean that we want you to go to high CCT, but it means there's no restriction. When you get to high, that is 4,000 K or lower. Medium. So that sort of takes us through the chart itself. And again, sorry, did I drop out?
Yeah, for a second there you did.
Sorry. So those are the 4 categories. We will be using CCT for the early days of this. Just that gives you a sneak peek at the IES documents, and watch for the LP2 coming out first on the outdoor lighting library. When it gets finalized, we'll be back to talk further about where we landed. Dwayne, over to you.
Okay, perfect. Just to remind the audience, if you have questions, please go ahead and submit those to either the chat box or the Q&A box. Hey, Shirley, just so I'm clear, so RP43 is new. It's not an update to an existing recommended practice, correct?
That's correct. It is a new RP. Right now, we have an RP for outdoor called RP 33, I believe it is, which is for environmental exterior lighting.
And so this is from a pedestrian standpoint, this
in general exterior lighting. Exterior lighting, correct? Yes, yeah. As opposed to RP8, which is it controls any pedestrian walkway that is adjacent or in the right of way, sort of right against the roadway. So that's all handled by the roadway committee, because that is all about making sure the vehicles see the pedestrians and pedestrian conflict. These documents, RP43 and LP2, are for pedestrian spaces that are outside of the right of way. So these would be on corporate campuses, public spaces downtown that are off the roadway, parks, or school campuses, university campuses, that kind of thing.
It seems like the term reassurance, we might have historically maybe security. Is that a fair way of looking at that?
Yes, exactly. That used to be bodily safety or security lighting, that kind of thing. But as more research has been done, we it's not the right way. It's not the right way to go. It's much better to make sure you're giving light that, and people aren't really trying to actually see the face. It's more about seeing people's hands, their intent, assessing whether, am I safe or not in this environment. And by just providing some vertical lighting, and so enough that people can see people's hands and get a sense of them as they come forward, that's more important. And getting rid of glare is a huge part of reassurance. And I think for a while, the idea was just add more light if it's a high security area, and that by itself is not a good solution.
Yeah, it's kind of a balance, it seems like, between reassurance and, if you think about like circadian lighting, they might be, look like they might, some cases, compete against one another. Is that a fair way of kind of looking at it? I also think you talked earlier in some of these other presentations about, brighter days and darker nights, and maybe using more light in the daytime, but at nighttime, maybe we don't need as much as we thought, right?
Yeah, correct. We definitely want these spaces to be, if the community intends for them to be used in certain hours, then to have the right amount of light to make people comfortable to sit and walk and navigate through these spaces and enjoy them. But then to dial it down or turn it off or put it on controls, I think for security, having something that comes back on when there is somebody in the space who isn't supposed to be is more effective than having a blast of light all the time.
Yeah, one of the comments we got was controls like Synapse and Limelight can do a great deal for outdoor lighting, especially in parks. Do you know if there's been any studies on that, like dimming them, and comment on there?
I know there is research showing that you have increased safety by having something that's responsive to motion, and definitely, and we could probably look at that for another session sometime to see what's out there. But exactly those kinds of systems are great for allowing us to not just save energy, but also keep the dark cycle that people and creatures need at night. And certainly for lighting around, if you're near, if your adjacency is something like a river area or something that is an environmental area, it's really important that we aren't putting light on, and that we're using it once the space is not active, that we really dial things down to allow the critters, as Naomi Miller likes to call them, so that we allow them to have their dark cycle as well.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I noticed on the RP43, the preliminary table that you were showing, a glare metric, which we don't always see in a lot of, I'm not used to seeing those a lot. And then the other one that was a little interesting to me was the view equaling 1 where a lot of cases, right, we're used to kind of no uplight. Do you want to comment maybe on what the thought went into that and what might be happening in that type of space?
On why we would allow a U1?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the expectation is that you will need to get the verticals. You need a lot of spaces. You're going to need some uplight to be able to show the space, reveal what's there. We want to limit uplight as much as possible, but depending on the lighting zone, there is an allowance. Just the recognition that you need to make the space comfortable. You don't want just little dark areas with pools of light that people are stepping in and out of. You really want to be able to reveal some of the landscape and the built environment as well. So that's why there would be some uplight allowed.
And then, but then also with a glare metric, also kind of managing that maybe a little bit more than what we thought about in the past. It seems like with a G of 1.
Yes, absolutely. And glare is one of those really challenging things. There's a ton of research being done. We don't have a great metric for it on how to characterize it. It's easier in an indoor space. We haven't quite. There are a lot of different things being tested and tried out, as including HDR, high dynamic range imaging on outdoor luminaires. But we recognize that the bug system, especially glare, is not a great isn't a great metric. But again, it's what we have for now, and there are a number of activities going on trying to assess glare in a dark environment because you've got such a contrast. There's a separate committee called DGON, which is dark adapted glare, because it's really challenging to assess glare in a dark, just because by the nature of the background you get such an intense reaction. So we're sticking with the bug rating for now, just because that's what we have.
Can you, and we'll get ready to close up shop here, but can you remind us again in terms of a timetable for LP-2 and RP43 when they might be finalized?
Yes, LP2 should be part of the lighting library, online lighting library that will be launched in the next couple of weeks. The IS annual conference is happening virtually next week and the week following. So I expect it in that time frame. Already done and completed and ready to publish document digitally. RP43 is still a ways off. It has been balloted and passed, but now goes out for public review. So it will be an ANSI document. So I think we're probably 60 to 90 days before we'll see that.
Okay, and Shirley and I have already talked about the possibility of revisiting RP43 as a topic once that document gets finalized. So Shirley, if you want to advance, we'll close up shop. I do want to thank Shirley again for her assistance and the great information shared in her presentation. Also, thank you to the audience for joining us. As we look ahead to the next couple of weeks, next week we'll be looking at a Cree lighting friend of the environment. So we'll be talking about some of the great environmental things we do as a business, in addition to delivering energy efficient products to the marketplace. And then the week after that, we'll be looking at outdoor lighting for airport environments. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. Again, if you've missed any content, it's all recorded and posted on our Cree Lighting YouTube channel. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Again, thanks for joining us. Enjoy your weekends, everyone.